Welcome back to the tutorials that I offer you. This time I'm going to be discussing the KAP diagnostic, behavioral diagnostic research in public health. Many a times, scholars who are engaged in public health research seem to misunderstand the meaning of KAP. And so this video has two missions to accomplish. One, to put right what the KAP diagnostic research is in public health, as well as help the scholar to be able to organize their research, their behavior diagnostic research, and then develop instruments using the theoretical framework appropriately to design their research, as well as the instrument for collecting the data. So that is what this video is going to discuss. So please listen attentively while we discuss the KAP behavioral diagnostics. All right, so we're going to be looking at the knowledge, attitude, perception regarding behavioral risk behavior in public health as a diagnostic framework to identify antecedents that are responsible for risk behaviors in the population. So we're going to look at this subject in this form, the outline here. What is theory? We're going to answer that question. How is theory relevant in public health research? We're going to answer that. What is the relevance of behavioral diagnosis in public health research? We're going to look at that. And then how is the behavioral diagnostic study conducted in public health research? All of this we're going to take in a moment. So the first one is, what is theory? Well, public health, first of all, I'm going to explain the context of this tutorial. Public health is a population-based field of practice where the unit of practice is the population, the community, and the unit of analysis is also the groups in the community. There is observed a lack of adequate application of behavior theories in public health research. We see this happening even in peer-reviewed journals that are published in the high impact and even middle impact journals. So theory is very important in elucidating the dynamics of natural phenomena. So if you're going to carry out any research and you do not have any theory, any form of theory, particularly epidemiological principles, behavioral principles, and public health principles embedded in your literature review, then it will be very difficult for this research to explain the dynamics of the problem phenomenon by the time we are discussing it. So theory is very important in elucidating the dynamics of natural phenomena. And this is why it's very important that we incorporate this when we are designing our research in public health. Not only in public health, but I'm emphasizing public health here because it concerns those of us who are in the field of public health. In science, pure science, applied science, biological science, the theory is already there. That's the science on which this study is grounded. And so I want to emphasize that if your study is going to be grounded in any science, one of the sciences that must be included and considered in designing your study would be epidemiological principles, behavioral principles, and public health principles. These are all the sciences that are required to provide a foundation in your study. Now, without theory, there would be no valid explanation of the natural phenomenon of any kind which your study seeks to explain. Because most studies, if not all studies, especially diagnostic studies, seeks to explain what is happening, what is the problem, what is the nature of the problem, and then goes further to identify why is this problem persisting, despite the fact that many studies have been carried out in the past concerning this phenomenon, interventional studies, including observational studies, have been conducted severally to either elucidate the dynamics or to halt the progression of the problem phenomenon. But we still have these occurring, persisting. And therefore, we need to look at whether previous studies have been properly designed and applying appropriate theories to assist in explaining the dynamics. Where this lack weakens the study. And therefore, without theory, such studies are not considered valid at all. Now, for example, I'll just give you an illustration of the function of theory. The flight of an aircraft is explained by the principles of aerodynamics, without which there would be no real understanding of the mechanism of objects in flight. We see that aircraft that are flying, as much as they are so big and they can carry so much passengers and load, they still take off and then fly and remain in flight until the pilot decides to bring them down. And therefore, any attempt to build such craft, we must take into consideration this phenomenon or this principle, aerodynamics. That is the principle that governs object in flight that overcomes the effect of gravity on such object. Now, an object that falls from up down to the ground can be explained simply by gravitational force. And so gravitational force is always acting on any object that is on this earth, including the aircraft that is flying. So once the aircraft takes off, the aerodynamic principles must overcome the gravitational force for it to take off and fly successfully. Therefore, as aerodynamic principles give meaning and understanding regarding objects in flight and permitting advancement in the design involving objects in flight, including cars that have taken up some of these dynamics in the design to save fuel, so also behavioral theories play a significant role in providing understanding of the dynamics of behavior-related health problems. Now, theory is very important in elucidating the dynamics of natural phenomena. We said that, and we can see that in our research, theories and models are very basic tools in public health research and health program planning. Now, in order to provide this understanding, we need to pick and select the most appropriate theories, models, and the problem phenomenon is what we consider to decide which theory would we use. Theories have been considered as a systematically organized knowledge applicable in relatively wide variety of circumstances devised to analyze, predict, or otherwise explain the nature of behavior of a specified set of phenomena. So, if you want to understand the problem you are trying to elucidate or you are investigating, you must look for the most appropriate behavior theory that will assist you to do two things. Explain the mechanism and then derive the appropriate variables for data collection. Now, again, let's see what models are. What is model and how is this relevant in public health research? Models have been viewed as visual construct of proposed causal linkages among a set of concepts believed to be related to particular public health problems. All right, so we're going to be looking at some of them. So theories and models provide the basic resources for developing conceptual framework. So without theories and models, any conceptual framework would be superficial, will be irrelevant, will have no scientific basis. So what is the KAP study in public health research? We'll be hearing about KAP. The KAP study in public health research is a behavioral diagnostic tool. And basically, it consists of the K, knowledge, A, attitudinal disposition, P, perceptions. Now, these are three major constructs that are connected with behavior. And in a particular way, they are linked together. I will give an explanation in a moment. So these antecedents help us to understand the outcome variable, the risk behavior of interest that is required to be diagnosed in our research. So behavior diagnosis requires that we examine the behavior and identify the antecedents that are connected with this behavior. And an appropriate model will be used, although there are many other models that are diagnostic, especially when the research is organized as an observational research in order to diagnose the behavior. Now, the premise is on health behavior usually, and seeks to identify the characterize health beliefs, all right, and the likely risk behavior that are related to the problem phenomenon. Now, the KAP study is derived from knowledge, attitude, and perception that are connected to particular risk behavior in a diagnostic investigation. Usually, people think KAP stands for knowledge, attitude, and practice. No, knowledge, attitude, and practice is not complete because the P is supposed to be perception, not practice. The knowledge, attitude, and practice are resources, constructs that and antecedents that helps us to understand the nature of the risk behavior that is being diagnosed. Most often, researchers assume that the KAP is knowledge, attitude, and practice, leaving out the essential cognitive link responsible for the response of attitudinal disposition and behavior. Now, this is the conceptual framework that will help us to understand the knowledge, attitude, and perception. These are antecedents to the behavior. So we find the behavior in the middle. Here we're using malaria prevention practice as the behavior, and the consequence will be malaria prevalence and can be identified and confirmed by malaria parastemia test. But the antecedents are knowledge about malaria, and then another antecedent will be attitudinal disposition about malaria consequences. These are the antecedents that trigger behavior or are associated with behavior. Now, models have been viewed in many ways, basically considered as visual constructs, like we have seen in the previous slide, of proposed causal linkages among a set of concepts believed to be related to a particular public health problem. Now, from the conceptual framework, the implementation reverts to set the research question. So in the development of the research, the conceptual framework becomes a blueprint to guide the development of the research question, the objective, the research hypothesis, and also the instrument design. So these items here are listed: the research question, the objective, research hypothesis. They constitute the thesis. The thesis, the argument of the researcher regarding the problem phenomenon the researcher seeks to elucidate. And without these questions raised appropriately and the conceptual framework considered, the instrument design will fail. So the diagnosed problem raises some questions requiring answers. And the questions are: what is the prevalence of malaria among participants in the study? The next question will be: what is the level of knowledge related to malaria as a disease and its prevention? This is assuming that it is suspected that poor knowledge of malaria and its consequences may be the reason why the preventive practice is low in the community. And then the next question will be: what is the level of perception? Because perception here presumes that if the perception is high, perception of risk, perception of severity, perception of benefit of taking action that is necessary to prevent malaria is high, then we can see that it will trigger appropriate attitudes and appropriate behavior. Again, our question is: what is the level of attitudinal disposition towards the consequences of malaria? Now, note that attitudes are difficult to measure because we do not have any instrument that measures attitude directly. So we can only look at and survey the disposition, the attitudinal disposition of the individual being recruited into the research. And then this sets the course of action, the specific objective to be taken. This is based on the research questions that I raised. So some of the specific objectives and the objectives are stated here. The aim of this study was to explore the levels of knowledge, attitude about malaria and preventive practice among pregnant women. All right, so the question comes, the specific objective follows. Now, all of these are from the conceptual framework. So the question now is: how is measurement conducted? How do we measure? All right, so the instrument has to take a cue from the objectives and the research hypothesis. Without the objectives stated, then the research hypothesis, the instrument cannot be appropriately measured. Okay. So the instrument is developed to measure phenomena in public health, social life, business transaction outcome. Therefore, as scientific instrument, an instrument has been calibrated, so questionnaires should be calibrated as well. Now, questionnaire is developed and tested. We have the development of questionnaire has to be validated, various validation process, and also tested for reliability. Items are coded and entered into the computer running the statistical product and service solution. And then frequency distribution are conducted. After that, we now conduct weighted aggregate scores of the responses. For example, when we're looking at knowledge, yes and no, or strongly agreed, agreed, disagreed, and strongly disagreed. or the behavior not at all, rarely, occasionally, and always, then we're going to assign numbers, codes, right? We're going to assign codes to represent those in their graded. So the various components of the conceptual framework must be represented in the instruments developed. So any part of the conceptual framework that are not necessary in the development of the instrument should not appear. Only those aspects that will appear in the instrument should feature in the conceptual framework. So we have section A, section B, we have section C, we have section D, and then we have section E. Right, so let's look at this. The paper pencil, that's the paper pencil instrument, and generally known as the questionnaire, used in collecting data in health science and social sciences, should be developed with all consideration of seriousness of rigor. Without that, the instrument will be invalid. The items in the questionnaire are not variables as such, but they are resources operationalizing the variables represented by sections in the title. All right, so the title must contain the major variables in the KAP, as knowledge, attitude, and perception. And then the diagnosis is related to behavior of concern. All right, note that respondents are expected to read the items and respond to them according to their experiences regarding the statement of the item. So we're not going to be testing the intelligence of the respondent, rather we're testing their experiences. Designing the questionnaire to measure according to the statement of their specific objective would require that during data analysis that these items be transformed into weighted score. This weighted score will operationalize the variables in the study. All right, so weighted scores reflect the magnitude and quality of responses of the respondent. Each respondent is scored. We're not scoring the questions, the items. We're not scoring the items, but we are scoring the individuals that are taking part in the study. Some researchers make the error of scoring the items in the questionnaire. That is absolutely wrong. We are scoring the respondents for their responses. We're measuring respondents. We're not measuring the items in the questionnaire. So when we operationalize the items, the items operationalize the variables. We now transform them into weighted aggregate score, so that we can derive means, standard error of the mean, and standard deviation. Now, these statistics will provide us opportunity of robust analysis, and so this is it. We need to learn this. With this data transformation, the research question can be answered. So without the data transformation, where we talk about weighted aggregate score for each individual depending on the variable, and then we now find the mean, we cannot answer the research questions very appropriately, because no item in the research can answer the research question, except only one item is used. Where you're using multiple items, like 10 items for knowledge or 9 items for perception, which item would you use to answer the research question? Except you transform it and synthesize the research the variable. All right, so some examples of how the results are presented. So from the questionnaire, we have a typical questionnaire here. All right, here is the demographic characteristics. So these are the items describing the demographic. Age at last birthday, you put the actual age. We do no longer put the category. We actually put actual years. Then ethnic, we have it. Educational attainment, we have it. Marital status. All of these are part of the first part. Then we have the second part, the part B. Section B is knowledge in this particular example, knowledge about malaria. So we have various items. Malaria is a disease. Malaria is caused by the bite from mosquito. The responses are yes, no, yes, no. These are for knowledge, cognition. You either know it or you don't know it, right? So this is it. Then this is another section, the attitudinal disposition, pregnant women towards malaria and its prevention. All right, so there must always be a statement that will direct the respondent in what to do and how to think. So here is one for this attitudinal discussion. Kindly tick in the appropriate column to indicate your feelings. Feelings has to do with emotion and attitude. So don't put how you think. Think is perception. So indicate your feelings or how your emotion and reaction correspond with regards to the subject matter as reflected in the statement below. So these are instructions that will help the respondent to anchor on the statement. All right, so we have the key, strongly agreed, disagreed, and strongly disagreed. These are typical Likert scale type responses. So the question is given an item, no question this time. These are items, and then the respondent will choose whichever it is and tick. So move on to the next. Malaria prevention practice. These are behavioral. So we're going to see behavioral aspect, because in behavioral, you are identifying frequency of performance of such actions. So behavior is action, not just like knowledge. So we have here not at all as the key. So you're not performing it not at all. Of course, not at all means the lowest. Rarely, that means one or, in fact, then you have occasionally, then you have very often. This is more like the practice is consistent. So we have all these items like I sleep under insecticide-treated bed net. If one says not at all, of course, not at all means your likelihood of being infected with the bite of the malaria-carrying mosquito is high. But very often means that you are always under the bed net. All right, so all the other items under prevention practice will follow with this type of. So strongly agreed will not work with this. Like for instance, you see, I sleep under an insecticide-treated bed net. Strongly agreed, disagreed. Doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense. Okay, so we move on. Here we have coded for coding. We want to recode our questionnaire so that we can measure the aggregate score. So these are weighted scores, 0, 1, 2, 3. They are weighted according to how correct they are in relation to the statements. 0, 1, 2, 3. So when all of them are aggregated, so you aggregate all the zeros, no matter how many items there are, will still be 0. So if there are 7 items, 7 times 0 is 0. If there are 7 items and 3 is the maximum, 7 times 3 will be 21, and so on. Similarly, with the prevention practice, not at all means not at all. We assign a 0 mark, a 0 score for that. And very often we are assigned the highest. So in recoding, all the previous codes for frequency distribution are converted and to weighted score to synthesize malaria prevention practice. All right, so again, to answer the question, here is very important. What is the level of malaria prevention practice among participants? You can get an answer with all of these answers. specific answers. All right, so this is the typical presentation of results. So we have this frequency distribution of the demographic characteristics of the participant. So you can see how we have this in place. This is a typical table. Another table for knowledge, the items, can count how many people. So after setting up the frequency distribution, we now come into the weighted score, the actual score for those variables. For knowledge about malaria, on a 15-point rating scale, these participants, 137 of them, scored a mean of 10.73 with a standard deviation of 1.62, and the prevalence of this knowledge amongst the sample is 71.5%. So attitudinal disposition also on 18-point rating scale, 9.7. So with this, you can easily answer your research question without mumbling and getting lost. Malaria prevention practice on a 24-point rating scale, this sample scored 13.69 with a standard deviation of 3 points. So each participant has a score, and all of them aggregated, we can find the mean of all of them with a standard deviation and even standard error of the mean. Okay, so these are conceptual framework which I've seen. So let's look at points to consider in the results. Presenting your result, whatever you do, avoid copying the computer data readout and pasting it in your result. This is unacceptable and demonstrates lack of professionalism. So you have to create tables like the one we have just shown you in the previous slide. So we have come to the end of this seminar. Thank you for viewing it. And if you have any questions, let me know. Thank you and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.